You know, when you're sipping on your favorite beer, have you ever stopped to think about where it actually starts? I mean, really starts. It's not in those big, shiny tanks, and it's not even with the hops. Nope. The whole story, the entire journey, kicks off with just a single, humble grain of malt. So, let's get into it. So, what makes a great beer? I bet for a lot of you, the first thing that comes to mind is maybe some fancy exotic hop variety or a super secret yeast strain the brewers guard with their life. And yeah, those things are absolutely crucial, but they're not page one of the story. The real soul of a great beer, its foundation, is laid down way, way before any of that. That's right, it's not just about the hops and yeast. It all begins with getting that perfect crush. I'm telling you, the quality, the flavor, the entire character of the beer you're drinking, so much of it is decided by how we treat the malt right at the start. And believe me, getting that grain ready is a lot more complex and, yeah, surprisingly dangerous than you'd probably think. Okay, so first things first. We're getting the perfect grain ready, but this is the first hurdle we've got to clear. Before a single one of those grains even sees the inside of a mill, it has to be absolutely, spotlessly clean. And we're not just talking about being tidy here. This is all about quality, it's about protecting some seriously expensive gear, and most importantly, it's about safety. So every single batch of malts that comes into the brewery goes through this super rigorous three-step cleaning gauntlet. First up, it gets screened. We're talking about getting rid of all the big stuff, straw, dust, little bits of the field. Then it goes through a destoner to pull out any tiny pebbles or stones. And the grand finale, a magnetic separation. Huge, powerful magnets pull out any little bits of metal that might be hiding in there. So, why go to all this trouble? What's the big deal? Well, here's why they're so careful. It's because malt dust is highly explosive. Yeah, you heard that right. That fine, almost flour-like dust that comes off the malt. If you get enough of it hanging in the air inside a building, it can be just as dangerous as gasoline fumes. The whole cleaning process we just talked about, all three steps, is designed to prevent just one tiny thing, a single stray spark. And this really hits the nail on the head. A single spark from metal hitting metal can cause a fire or explosion. Just imagine a tiny piece of metal, a stray screw or a bit of wire, making it into the mill. When it hits those massive steel rollers, boom, you get that one spark. And that's all it takes to ignite the dust in the air. We're talking a catastrophic explosion. So yeah, all that cleaning, it's not just a nice to have, it's an absolutely critical safety protocol. All right, so the grain is clean, it's safe, and we've dodged a pretty serious bullet. Now we can move on to the next stage, the art of the crush. This is all about milling, and it is truly where art meets science. It's a really delicate balancing act that, honestly, sets the stage for everything else that's going to happen in the brewhouse. So, what exactly is milling? Well, the idea is pretty simple, at least on paper. You're just trying to crush the malt grains. The whole point is to crack them open and get to all the starches packed inside. That's the good stuff. That's the sugar source, the food for the yeast later on. But, and this is a huge but, you have to do this while keeping the outer husk mostly intact. The walnut analogy is perfect here. You want to get the tasty nut out, but you need to save the shell because we're going to need it later. You'll see why. And this is what we call the brewer's dilemma. It is a constant tightrope walk. If you crush the grain too coarsely, right, the starches stay all locked up inside. You won't get enough sugar out and your beer will be weak. But if you go too far the other way and crush it into a fine powder, you're going to have a whole different problem. It'll turn into the sticky, gummy mess that clogs up all the pipes and filters. So it can't be too coarse, it can't be too fine, it has to be just right. Now, to hit that perfect sweet spot, brewers have a whole toolbox of different milling machines. For a lot of smaller craft brewers, a simple 2-roll mill does the trick. But for more control, you've got 4-roll and even 6-roll mills. These are way more precise, basically peeling the husk off first before crushing the starchy insides. It's pretty cool. Then you've got the total opposite, the hammer mill. This thing just pulverizes the grain into a fine powder, which is perfect if you're using a fancy mash filter where you don't need the husks at all. The machine you choose really all comes down to the kind of beer you're making and the specific setup of your brewery. Okay, so our grain is perfectly crushed. By the way, at this point, we stop calling it malted barley and start calling it grist. And with our grist ready to go, it's time for the first real bit of brewery magic. This next step is called mashing, and it's where we take that dry, crushed grain and start the process of turning it into a sweet, wonderful liquid. Honestly, the best way to think about mashing is that it's like making the world's most scientific oatmeal. I'm not kidding. At its heart, it's really simple. You just take the grist and mix it with hot water. That's it. This new mixture is now called the mash, and the moment that hot water hits the grist, it's like an alarm clock goes off for all these natural enzymes inside the malt that have been sleeping this whole time. And then we wait. The mash just sits there and rests, usually for about an hour or so. Now, if you looked at it, you'd think nothing is happening. It just looks like a big tub of porridge. But inside, on a microscopic level, it's absolute chaos. It's a crazy hive of activity, with all these complex biochemical reactions firing off. So for this to all work out, the brewer has to be like a conductor, controlling 4 key things perfectly. First, you've got the enzymes themselves. Think of them like tiny little pairs of scissors, and their job is to snip up the long, complex starch chains into simple, delicious sugars. Then there's temperature. Each type of enzyme has a favorite temperature it likes to work at, so you have to hit those numbers exactly. You also need to give them enough time to do their job. And finally, pH. The water has to have just the right level of acidity for those enzyme scissors to work efficiently. So when the mashing is all done, if the brewer did everything right, a beautiful transformation has happened. All those starches from the grain have been converted into sugars. The grain has officially done its job. And what we're left with is this amazing, sweet, sugary liquid. That liquid is called wort. And that wort, well, that's the blank canvas on which the rest of the beer is going to be painted. All right, we've got our sweet wort, our liquid gold. But it's still all mixed in with the mush of the spent grains. So the final step in this part of the journey is the great separation. We've got to figure out how to get that beautiful liquid away from all the solid stuff. And remember how I said we needed to save the husks from the milling process? Well, this is the payoff. Those very same husks now become their own perfect natural filter. As the wort drains down, the bed of grain husks catches all the little solid bits, letting only the clear liquid pass through. It's such an elegant, brilliant system that's built right into the process. Kind of cool, right? Now, there are a few ways to do this separation. The first and most traditional method is using what's called a mash tun. It's basically an all-in-one deal. The mashing and the separating happen in the same tank. It's simple, it works great, you get really clear wort, but it is pretty slow. Then you've got method number 2, the lauter tun. This is a step up. It's a vessel that's dedicated only to separation. So the mash gets moved over here, and the big upgrade is this set of rotating rakes. They slowly churn and cut through the grain bed, keeping it from getting all compacted. This means the wort can drain through much faster, and you get more of it out. Better quality, higher recovery. And finally, we have the high-tech option, the mash filter. This thing looks less like something from a brewery and more like a giant accordion. It's a totally different approach. It uses a series of high-pressure plates and filter sheets to literally squeeze every last drop of wort out of the grain. It is incredibly fast and gives you the absolute best yield you can possibly get. This table really breaks down the trade-offs perfectly. So let's take a look. With a mash tun, you need a coarse grist, and you can maybe get about 5 brews done in a day, with a 97% recovery of your sugars. Not bad. Move up to the lauter tun, you can use a finer grist, and you're now looking at 6 to 12 brews a day, with efficiency bumping up to 98%. But then you get to the mash filter. You can use a very fine powder, pump out more than 12 brews a day, and the recovery is over 100%. Wait, how is that possible? Well, the lab standard for 100% is actually a little inefficient, and the mash filter is so darn good at squeezing out every last molecule of sugar that it actually beats the lab analysis. It's wild. So let's recap. We've taken a single hard grain, cleaned it, crushed it, mashed it, and separated it into this beautiful, clear, sweet liquid called wort. The foundation of our beer is officially built. But it's not beer. Not yet. It's really just sugary water. It's missing that bitter bite and, the fun part, the buzz. So yeah, the journey to beer has just begun. The next stage is boiling it all up with hops and then finally letting the yeast do its magic. That's where the sweet liquid really, truly transforms into the beer we all know and love. But hey, that's a story for another day. For now, just know that the groundwork has been perfectly laid.